The courtroom was quiet until a black teenager stood accused of a crime he didn't commit. The judge was ready to throw the book at him, cold, fast, and final. But just as the gavel was about to drop, a door creaked open, and in walked the last man anyone expected. A man in a Supreme Court robe. A man with a secret. A man who just happened to be the boy's grandfather. What happened next unraveled everything the system tried to bury: lies, corruption, betrayal, and one chance to make it right. This is the story of a trial that never should have happened, and the people who refuse to stay silent. Watch till the end, because justice has never sounded like this before. The boy stood silent, wrists cuffed, the cold steel biting into skin that hadn't even finished growing into manhood. The courtroom was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made your ears strain for something, anything, to distract from the weight of judgment about to fall. Judge Brenner's eyes, cold and sunken, flicked down to the folder on her bench. Her gavel sat inches from her hand like a threat. Malik didn't look at anyone, not his public defender, who had stopped pretending weeks ago, not his mother, whose silent tears had dried into resignation. He looked instead at the wood grain of the floor, where a faint scuff mark caught the light. Something real, something that didn't lie. He hadn't done it. He knew that, but knowing didn't matter here. Not in this room. The jury had taken less than 2 hours. And Judge Brenner, she'd barely hidden her disdain for him since day one. A breeze stirred when the door at the back creaked open. Every head turned. The bailiff frowned, already rising from his post near the wall. And then he stopped mid-step. A tall black man entered, silver hair gleaming beneath the courtroom's stale lighting, dressed in full Supreme Court regalia, black robe flowing, eyes unreadable. The silence deepened as though the room itself was holding its breath. Judge Brenner sat back, blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Malik turned, slowly. His heartbeat wasn't pounding. It had stopped altogether. The man didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone, just walked to the gallery's front row, sat and folded his hands. The velvet quiet that followed wasn't reverent. It was terrifying, like the world had shifted 1 degree and no one knew how to stand anymore. Judge Brenner cleared her throat, visibly shaken. "This courtroom is in session," she said, voice thinner than before. Her gavel hit the wood. "Mr. Johnson, you've been found guilty. Before sentencing, do you have anything to say?" Malik stood still. The world waited. And then he spoke, voice steady, eyes never leaving the man in the robe. "Yeah," he said, "I got something to say. But it's not for you." The courtroom shifted like a living thing. Judge Brenner's jaw tightened. "You will address the court." But Malik didn't look at her. He looked straight into the eyes of the man who hadn't even flinched. "Why now?" Malik asked him. "Why today?" The man's lips pressed together. No answer. The judge turned toward him, her voice rising. "Sir, identify yourself or you'll be removed." He stood, slowly, deliberately. "I am Charles Ellison, Associate Justice, United States Supreme Court." And then he turned, not to the judge, not to the press who were already raising their phones, but to Malik's mother in the gallery. "Hello, Janine." Her breath caught. For a moment, everything disappeared. The judge, the cameras, even Malik's cuffs. She stood up like a puppet pulled by strings. "You don't get to speak to me," she said, her voice shaking. "Not after 30 years. The judge pounded the gavel again. "This is highly irregular," she barked. "Mr. Ellison, I don't care who you are, this courtroom," he cut in, voice booming but composed, "has already made one mistake. I won't let it make another." The silence returned like a vacuum. Malik's knees buckled slightly, but he held his ground. The public defender looked between them, clueless, unsure if this was good or very, very bad. The prosecutor, a smug middle-aged man with a dimple that hadn't faded since prep school, rose to speak. "Your Honor, if I may—" "No, you may not," Judge Brenner snapped, more rattled than she wanted to admit. "This court will have order." But it didn't. Not anymore. Charles stepped forward, and every inch of the room seemed to bend toward him. "Your Honor, I request to be heard, not as a justice, but as a citizen." as a grandfather. The words hit like a gunshot. Someone in the back gasped. The judge's hand hovered above her gavel. "This is not protocol," she said, but her voice wavered. Malik stared at the man, his grandfather, and his mind raced. The trial had been rigged from the start. Unreliable eyewitness, missing surveillance footage, a rushed jury. But this was something else. The judge motioned the bailiff over. A whisper, a nod. She looked down at Malik. "You will remain silent," she said. "I'm allowing 5 minutes. No more." She glared at Charles. "This is not your courtroom." Charles Ellison stepped into the center aisle, robe trailing, and began to speak. "There are moments," he said, "when the law fails to see the people in front of it. I've spent a lifetime within its machinery, and I know when that machinery has been weaponized." His voice cracked slightly. It was the first time he sounded human. "I left my daughter. I know what that cost. I don't expect forgiveness. But I will not watch the system crush my grandson just because it can." The judge leaned forward, grip tightening. "You are out of line." "And so were you," Charles said. From the moment this boy walked in, everything stopped again. Malik's mother had sat back down, hand over her mouth. The jury, still seated despite their job being done, looked as if they were trapped in a new kind of trial, one where the truth had no clear sides. Charles turned to them. "How many of you felt it? That tug in your gut that something was wrong, but you told yourself the evidence was enough?" He paused. "You were manipulated. By pressure, by precedent, and by a prosecution that didn't want truth, it wanted to win." The prosecutor rose again, face red. "Objection. There's no trial left to object to." Charles snapped. Then he looked back at Malik. "I failed your mother. I let fear drive me away. But I will not let fear drive this verdict." Malik blinked, chest rising and falling. "You think a speech changes anything?" he whispered. "Where were you when they called me thug? Where were you when they shoved me to the ground outside that store?" Charles didn't speak. "Exactly," Malik said, louder now. "You want to be my grandfather today? Cool. But where were you every day before that?" Charles looked down. The courtroom watched a man carry the weight of decades in his silence. Judge Brenner stood now, visibly shaken. "This is over," she said. "I will deliver sentencing, and this circus will end." Charles didn't move. "Then sentence us both," he said, "because this boy isn't the only one you're condemning." Malik's mother let out a sob. Judge Brenner's eyes narrowed. She looked at Malik, and for the first time, her voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. "You really didn't do it, did you?" Malik stared back. "I already told you, but you weren't listening." The judge hesitated. Then her hand hovered over the gavel, and just before she brought it down, Malik said, "Ask the court officer." He saw the footage. He erased it. The entire room turned, and the officer, who had been stone-faced the whole time, finally flinched. The court officer didn't move at first. His face locked in place like marble, carved by years of pretending to be invisible. But his hand twitched. That was all it took. A collective inhale rippled through the courtroom as every eye shifted toward him. The judge's hand froze above the gavel, eyes narrowing. "You want to repeat that, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, her voice slicing through the air. Malik didn't flinch. "I said he erased the surveillance footage. The one that would have cleared me." The officer's throat bobbed. He tried to scoff, but it came out like a choke. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Charles stepped toward him now, eyes sharp. "Because you were first on scene. You had full access to the store security system before it was handed off to detectives. And somehow, there's a gap in the recording, exactly where the suspect's face should have been visible." The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Was that ever disclosed in discovery?" The prosecutor looked stunned, then defensive. "Your Honor, the footage we received was incomplete from the source. I assumed." "You assumed what?" Charles barked. "That no one would notice." "Enough," Judge Brenner snapped. "Officer Doyle, come forward. Now." The officer didn't move. "Now," she repeated, her voice ice. Doyle finally stepped up the bench. His walk was slow, shoulders suddenly hunched. He glanced at Malik, just for a second, and looked away. His voice was low. I didn't erase anything. But you accessed it, Charles said. Didn't you? The pause that followed was louder than any shout. Judge Brenner stood, no longer trying to hide her trembling. Answer the question. Doyle's jaw clenched. There was pressure to close the case. Fast. Malik's mother gasped. A reporter dropped her pen. Doyle kept talking, eyes hollow. Store owner's brother's a donor to the mayor's campaign. Didn't want the neighborhood panicking. So, yeah, I scrubbed the last 10 seconds. And those 10 seconds would have shown what? Charles demanded. Doyle didn't answer. Malik stepped forward now. Me running into the store. Not out. I was chasing the guy, not robbing the place. The courtroom wasn't breathing. Judge Brenner's gavel lowered, but she didn't strike. Her hand trembled as it hovered above the block. Officer Doyle, she said slowly, you just admitted to evidence tampering. That's a felony. I was following orders, he whispered. That's not a defense. Charles shot back. That's a confession. The judge turned to the prosecutor. Did you know? No, he said, sweating. I swear I didn't. Charles turned to her, voice softening but no less sharp. This case is falling apart at the seams. And your sentence hasn't been delivered yet. You have a choice, Judge. She looked down at Malik. Really looked at him. Not as a case file. Not as a number. Not as a black boy in a hoodie. But as someone who had just been nearly erased by the system she was supposed to uphold. I should declare mistrial, she said under her breath. Charles shook his head. No, you should dismiss the charges. Right now. That's justice. Malik was trembling now, but he stood tall. Or you can sentence me, he said. Pretend this never happened. Protect the badge, the bench, and whatever scraps of power they gave you. Go ahead. The judge's face darkened. Watch your tone. I've been watching my tone since I was 5, he said. It never saved me. The silence that followed broke when Janine's voice, cracked and raw, rose from the gallery. Don't you dare send him away. Not again. The judge turned to her. Miss Johnson. No, she said. You don't get to talk down to me like I'm not standing on the bones of every woman who's had to survive the system. You're scared now? Good. Sit in it. Charles took a breath. You have one job left, Judge. One. Judge Brenner's hand finally dropped. Not on the gavel, but on the case file. She closed it. Charges dismissed, she said, barely audible. The courtroom exploded into gasps and murmurs. Malik didn't move. He stared at her, then at Charles. That it, he asked. I'm just supposed to walk out like nothing happened? No, Charles said. You walk out knowing exactly what happened, and that it doesn't get to define you. Malik shook his head, the pressure breaking loose behind his eyes. You think this is over? He whispered. You just showed up. You didn't fight with me. You didn't cry with my mom. You just appeared when it looked good. I deserve that, Charles said. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Janine stood. We don't need you now. Charles looked at her. You don't, but I need you. For a beat, her eyes softened, then hardened again. You needed us before. Malik turned toward the exit, but stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You came too late, he said, barely audible. I know, Charles replied, but I'm staying anyway. And behind them, the gavel finally dropped, not as a sentence, but as a reckoning. A low rumble of voices followed Malik as he stepped down. The courtroom had shifted. The air wasn't just thick with tension now. It was volatile, uncertain. A place where truth had cracked open the floor, but hadn't yet rebuilt anything in its place. The bailiff, still trying to look impartial, kept sneaking glances at Officer Doyle, who stood in the corner as though gravity had turned against him. His uniform hung heavy, no longer armor, just cloth and gilt. Charles looked at him too, not with vengeance, but with the quiet wrath of someone who had waited far too long for justice to stretch both ways. You're not done, Charles said to the judge, voice low. This courtroom is still watching. The country is watching. Her lips tightened. I did what needed to be done. No, he said, stepping closer. You did what you were forced to do. A beat passed. Then another. She didn't answer. Malik turned slowly toward Charles, voice sharp. Why now? You waited 17 years. Why this moment? Why here? Charles's eyes flickered with something like regret, but it was deeper, older, like it had roots under his skin. Because I failed too many times in silence. And I couldn't fail again while wearing this robe. And what? You think walking in here with a title makes you a savior? Malik said, It doesn't change anything. I still sat in a jail cell for 3 months. I still thought I was done. I'm not a savior, Charles said. I'm a man who should have been there when your father wasn't. When I wasn't. Janine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This isn't the time, she whispered, but it wasn't a plea. It was a dare. Malik's eyes glistened. So now what? You want to make up for lost years? Take me to dinner? Pretend like this isn't just a wound with a robe standing over it. No, Charles said again. I want to stand beside it. If you'll let me. Malik turned away. I can't forgive a man who only shows up for finale. Charles's face broke for just a second, and then he nodded. Then let me stand in the credits. Quietly. Behind them, Doyle was being let out in cuffs. The same courtroom that had once looked away now stared at him with full, judgmental clarity. One of the jurors started crying. Not loud, just a single drop falling, a silent acknowledgement that this wasn't justice. It was survival with bruises. The judge reached for her water, but her hand was trembling too much to lift it. This day's not done, she said. There will be an inquiry into the chain of custody, into every hand that touched that case file. Charles met her gaze. Good. Let them feel the fire. Then Malik did something no one expected. He turned to the audience, the reporters, the jurors, the strangers with furrowed brows. And he said, I didn't ask to be a symbol. I just wanted to graduate. Janine covered her mouth. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thunder swallowed whole. The judge exhaled, finally human again. This hearing is adjourned. Malik didn't move. Neither did Charles. It was Janine who stood first. She looked at her grandson, her voice just above a whisper. We don't walk out of here like nothing happened. We walk out of here different. Malik finally nodded, slowly, but as he stepped forward, the door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A new figure entered, tall, suited, with eyes that scanned the room like they'd been watching from behind the curtain. Someone from the State Bar? Internal Affairs? Charles's jaw tensed. The man stopped at the bar. Judge Brenner, he said coolly, we need to speak. In chambers. Now. Her face paled. And for the second time that day, everyone knew this wasn't the end. This was only the middle of a deeper reckoning. The suited man's presence sucked the heat out of the room. His voice hadn't risen above a whisper, yet it sliced sharper than any gavel. Judge Brenner rose from the bench slower this time. Her authority wobbled, but not broken. Yet, she looked to Charles, then to Malik, then finally to the man. We'll speak in chambers. But if this is an ambush, you'd better know which direction the fire's coming from. The man didn't flinch. I know exactly where the fire is. That's why I'm here. Charles moved to follow, but the man turned. Alone. Malik narrowed his eyes. Why just her? Because I said so, the man replied, and though he didn't raise his voice, the room froze like someone had cracked a window and let winter inside. As the chamber door closed behind them, Janine leaned toward Charles. You know who that is? Charles nodded, tight-lipped. Federal oversight. He doesn't show up unless the department's already writing the headlines. Malik sat down slowly, as if the bench beneath him might vanish. His fingers twitched against his knee, restless. So what now? They gonna take her down too? Charles gave a quiet hum. Maybe, but that's not justice. That's just chess. Silence took over for a beat before Malik turned to him, raw. Tell me what happened to my father. Not the headlines. Not the lie you told the papers. The truth. All of it. Charles's eyes dimmed, as if something old was waking inside him. He was brilliant, loud, angry, the kind of man this system never forgives for being 3 steps ahead. They planted the gun. They made sure the case file was sealed tight. And I was a junior clerk then. I knew, but I said nothing. You let him rot, Malik said. I did, Charles whispered. And I swore if I ever made it high enough, I'd tear the floorboards up with my own hands. I waited too long. But today I made a dent. Malik laughed once, hollow. You made a dent while I drowned. The chamber door creaked open again. Judge Brenner walked out alone. Her face was pale, the red drained. The man was gone. She approached the bench, but didn't sit. They're suspending me pending investigation. Effective immediately. No one spoke. Even the court recorder paused her fingers. And, she added, almost as an afterthought, they're opening a case into my past rulings, including the one from this morning. Janine raised her head. You're scared. I should be, the judge said, eyes fixed on Malik. But I'm also relieved. Malik blinked. Why? Because for the first time, I'm not hiding behind the bench. The door opened again. This time it was a younger man in a clerk's badge. He approached Charles directly. Sir, the governor's on the line. Wants to know if you'll be assuming temporary oversight. Charles didn't move. Malik stared. You gonna take it? Charles looked at him, at Janine, at the remnants of a shattered courtroom. Only if we do it together. Together? Malik asked. You, me, and every voice they try to bury. Malik didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The courtroom had changed. Not fixed, not healed, but cracked open wide enough for sunlight to bleed in. And then someone whispered from the back, an older woman, maybe a teacher or a neighbor. She stood and clapped once. Just once. It echoed. Then someone else followed. Then another. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. It was honest. And Malik, for the first time since walking through those doors, stood tall, not accused, not broken. Just a boy who'd survived the fire and stepped out with scars that finally meant something. But just as it started to feel like an ending, a phone rang from the prosecutor's table. The ADA reached for it, checked the screen, and paled. She looked at Malik, then Charles. There's been another case, she said, voice trembling. Same arresting officer. Same planted evidence. And it's still active. Malik stepped forward. We're not done, he said, and the courtroom held its breath all over again. The ADA's voice barely made it through the thick silence. We just got confirmation. The kid's still inside. Same holding cell. 18 years old. No priors. Arrested 3 nights ago. Malik didn't wait. He looked at Charles, urgency replacing the rage. We need to move. Now. Charles nodded, motioning to the bailiff. Give me everything on that arrest. Doyle's file. Every officer connected to it. The judge was still standing, coat draped over her arm like a surrender flag. If you do this, if you expose what's under all that stone, it won't just be one case. It'll be dozens, maybe hundreds. Charles met her eyes, tired but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. Then we better start digging. They pushed through the courtroom doors like they were leading a march, the weight of history in every step. Janine stayed behind for a moment, watching them go. Then she looked out at the strangers in the pews, eyes wide, faces stunned but awake now, truly awake. She spoke to no one and everyone. This is how it begins, not with riots, not with silence, but with truth, one voice, then another. Back in the hallway, Malik walked beside Charles, his steps fast, determined. What's this kid's name? Don't know yet. The ADA called out, heels clicking behind them. But it's going to matter. As they reached the holding area, the air shifted. Not fear, not yet, but electricity. The kind that comes before lightning. They passed the metal doors. A guard recognized Charles and stood a little straighter. Heard what happened upstairs, the guard said. Is it true? Charles just nodded. About time, right? The cell door buzzed. Inside, a young boy stood alone, eyes wide. His hands were tucked into his hoodie pocket, like they were his only shield. Malik stepped forward first. The boy backed up. "We're not here to hurt you," Malik said gently. "We're here to get you out." The boy stared. "Why?" "Because someone should have done it for me," Malik said. "And no one did." A long pause. Then the boy whispered, "My name's Eli." Charles put a hand on the bars. "Eli, we're going to fix this. Starting with you." Tears welled up in the kid's eyes. "You don't even know me." "You don't have to know someone to believe they matter," Malik said, voice shaking. "You just have to care." And in that moment, 3 generations stood in a hallway drenched in concrete and fluorescent light, and for the first time, it felt like morning. Outside the courthouse, people were gathering, not with signs, not yet, but with cameras, with questions, with hope. Malik looked at them through the glass. "They're not just watching anymore," he said. "They're waiting." "For what?" Charles asked. "For what comes next." "So here's what comes next. We keep going, one name at a time, one story at a time, because justice doesn't begin with verdicts. It begins with voices. If this story moved you, if it cracked something open in your heart, share and subscribe, because every time you do, you help another story rise. And remember, the system won't save us, but we can save each other. He walked in a prisoner. He walked out a voice. In a courtroom built to silence him, one truth shattered the silence. One voice became 2, then a movement, because when justice fails from the top, sometimes it has to rise from the floor. They tried to end the story with a sentence, but he rewrote the ending. If this shook you, if it stirred something deep, don't scroll away. Like, share, subscribe, because stories like this don't just entertain. They expose, they inspire, they ignite. And remember, justice isn't a place. It's a fight, and it starts with us.